Welcome to the County Manager's Report. I'm Lloyd Higuera, and with me is Interim County Manager Mimi Moss. Welcome, Mimi.
Thank you very much for having me.
And you're not an unfamiliar face around the county. You've been Community Development Director for how many years?
Since 2008.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Going to make me do the math.
Yeah.
Okay, and you, for the first quarter, are the interim county manager, but the county manager was a topic of discussion at the commission meeting, and maybe we'll dive right into it here. We're going to talk about the February 4th and the February 18th meetings of the Douglas County Board of Commissioners, and on the 4th, commissioners did take action to hire an interim county manager. Commissioners approved a one-year contract with Larry Werner, and can you give us more details about his hiring?
Sure. As you mentioned, it was a one-year contract. As you are aware, Larry was an interim county manager for a period of time for about 5 months in 2014, following the resignation of Steve Mokahaiski and before Jim Nichols came on board. And so that was a good transition time for us. So the discussion at the board meeting centered about his capabilities, his experience and knowledge, the fact that he is a resident of the county and he's familiar with processes as being the city manager for Carson City. So there was a lot of discussion regarding those qualifications and then the salary itself. The salary was approved at a little under $172,000 a year plus a $700 car allowance. So there was a lot of discussion on that regarding trying to save money in the budget and you know, is this important for the new county manager and the employees too? What do the employees see in terms of the viability of paying that much to an interim county manager? So they had a lot of discussion regarding that. They also discussed whether or not they should have actually open it up and have a recruitment inside the county. With existing employees. So there was discussion regarding, you know, what are you telling your employees? Are you valued employees? And do we think that there might be someone within the county structure that might be able to fill this position over time? So there was discussion on that. I think that was one of the reasons why they set it for a one-year contract in terms of having Larry come in, and he's a known quantity as they discussed at the meeting. He works well with staff, and so because of that, they wanted to provide some stability in the community and then have Larry look at whatever needs to be done in the next year, whether that is looking at making adjustments internally within the department or moving forward with something else. So that's going to be part of discussions in the future. But they talked about, you know, trying to look at maybe an assistant county manager they may create that framework for building someone in the county system into a county manager position at some point in time.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate in Douglas County over the years to have people inside that were able to take on the job, from Dan Holler to Michael Brown to Steve Mokahaiski. And yeah, and it's always worked out very well. But they've gone on to bigger and better, you know, positions.
That's true.
Which is great. I mean,
yeah,
you know,
great opportunities for them, and it's the way it should be, and that's typical for county managers. You know, 2 to 5 years is not unknown in terms of coming into a community and staying that long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it isn't. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be a lifetime position, except for Larry.
Except for Larry. Larry, for sure. He's a glutton for punishment, right?
Yeah. Well, that's good to have him back. And I should have said too. He's, as you said, he's not an unfamiliar face around here either. He's worked for the county a couple of times before, interim county manager and the community development.
And the community development director years ago, before I actually started with the county. So Larry has a great working relationship with staff, and we really look forward to that in the future.
Okay, well, it's going to be interesting to see how it all develops over the next year.
I agree.
But the first step has been taken.
Exactly.
Well, also, commissioners heard an update report from a citizens task force formed to study county-wide stormwater flooding and also county roads. And what's the latest from that group?
Well, there is going to be a workshop next, the Thursday, March 10th, with the board. This task force will be providing their draft recommendations to the board regarding new policies and amended policies in the master plan, as well as some recommendations on what the board might do. So that's coming forward. As you're aware, you know, in 2014, in the summer, we had flash flooding events, especially in the Johnson Lane area. And then following the next year, in 2015, we had those same events. And that was the purpose of the task force, was to look at policies and bring some of the residents and some of those experts together as a task force group to look at trying to put together those policies and recommendations to the board and help them make those decisions in the future. So hopefully we'll be able to at least provide draft recommendations to the board. This is just a presentation on March 10th. The meeting is from 11 to 1 o'clock on that Thursday, and it's going to be at the Emergency Operations Center, the East Fork Fire District facility on County Road. We encourage any residents to come and participate in those discussions. The board will not take final action on that item. It's just a kind of an open dialogue discussion, and so we're encouraging residents to participate where they can. And then our hope is that any recommendations would come in front of the board and be considered at their April 7th meeting.
I see.
Here in the
Now
Valley.
that task force wasn't formed that long ago, was it? I mean,
no,
6
it was
months ago?
right. It was like the board gave direction to the county manager in September of last year of 2015. So it was put together shortly after that, and they've met probably about 7 or 8 times since then. Yes.
So they've come up with recommendations.
Yes, they had. It took quite a bit to get to this point because a lot of people on the task force didn't understand the history of flooding in the community.
Sure.
And some of the existing master plan provisions. Also, too, what we had looked at in terms of financing previously and where we were at in that whole process for flood control in general.
I see.
And also road maintenance. As you know, many of the roads were washed out, and in terms of the drainage areas and the problems with the cleanup after that. So part of this task force is to look at policy regarding roads as well. When you have emergency situations, you need to be able to get in and get out. And so how do you make that happen when you have deficiencies in existing drainages along some of those roadways?
Well, this will be an interesting one to follow.
Yes, it will.
That's for sure.
It will.
Well, now we go to your wheelhouse. Commissioners heard a report on the status of the 2015 master plan.
Yes,
And
they did.
what's that looking like?
Well, as you know, we do that every year, and there were like 106 action steps in the master plan when it was updated in 2011. And to date, there's probably been 22 or so that have been completed. There's a little over 30 that are still underway and in process, so about half of those have not even been started. So the discussion, the discussion at the Planning Commission and the board both was, as we go forward with our master plan update this year, starting this year, we need to take a look at those goals and policies in the master plan as well as those action items and determine if those are still applicable or not, or if we need to amend them or delete them in their entirety or replace them. So that's part of the discussion we had with the Planning Commission, the joint meeting with the Planning Commission and board. So we will be looking at those. There wasn't a lot to report for the last year in terms of what we've accomplished over the past year, but it's certainly something we're going to delve into when we update our master plan this year. And hopefully that will begin early summer this year and start some of those processes in the public's eye and out in the community.
Well, you said there wasn't much to report, but do you have a highlight or two of some of the things that were accomplished?
Actually, we did some stormwater infrastructure, implementing some stormwater program up at Lake Tahoe under the TMDL program. It's their water quality program.
Right.
So we were able to implement that. East Fork Fire also completed their assessment, and that was on the list to complete as well. So that's really the highlights. It's like most, as I mentioned to the Planning Commission and the board together, that we have a lot of items that are still underway. We continue to work toward programs for economic improvements, economic development, for stormwater quality, for drainage systems, a lot of that. for programs such as the Trails program and getting trails completed, moving forward with grants on certain items that we've done over the course of the last couple of years. So Martin Slough Trailhead is a good example of moving forward with that, and that's part of the action steps. So it's a broad range of items under the master plan that are still underway.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Well, commissioners at their February 4th meeting also moved ahead with the dissolution of the Sheridan Acres General Improvement District. And can you give us more details on that particular item?
Sure. Well, the history is it was formed in 1966. That's a long time ago. But they never function as a general improvement district. Most general improvement districts take care of drainage or roads or something similar to that effect. In this case, the general improvement district never functioned. And so state law says, yes, we put this together as a district in order to provide a service to the residences in this area. They never did it. So technically, they were not in compliance with state law. And because of that, we received a petition written request from some of the property owners within Sheridan Acres and asked that that be dissolved. So that's why the board took the action. There's really no reason to have that continue as a general improvement district. As you are aware, years ago when Sheridan Acres was developed, they had their own private water system, and maybe it was set up for that initially. Don't know, but as you also probably know, that was put into receivership, and the county ended up taking on that system and making those improvements and tying into Job's Peak water system. So maybe that was one of the reasons. Hard to say. I wasn't here in '66, and things change over the years.
Oh, they sure do. And so there never was a board ever formed then?
No, not that we're aware of, no. Yeah, it was just the residents knew about it, but nobody involved.
And it just kind of sat there for all those years.
It did.
Yeah, so no reason to keep it around.
That's exactly what the board said.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the February 18th meeting up at Lake Tahoe. And commissioners did hold a public hearing on the proposed redevelopment plan for redevelopment at Lake Tahoe. And they also approved an ordinance to move ahead with that plan. Could you give us more detail on the plan?
Sure. Well, over the years, our staff and the county manager's staff has had discussions with private property owners on what they intended to do on their property in terms of redeveloping over time. A lot of discussions with some of the casino owners, as well as Edgewood and Tahoe Shores is one of them, Lakeside Inn. So there's been discussion about how do we improve the situation there. Is there a way to provide incentives for businesses to improve properties? As what's known as Edgewood is in the process of building their lodge, a 150-some unit lodge facility. They're in that process today. We have Tahoe Shores residential project, over 150 units there, about 150 units there, not too far from that area. And so those properties are called out within the boundaries of the redevelopment area. State Line Core, the Casino Core, Edgewood, Lakeside Inn, and Tahoe Shores. The reason that those are earmarked is those are very high intensity and multifamily commercial uses. There's a potential, we know, at least certainly for 2 properties that are in the process or will be improving the property. They've had questions, and so the hope was that with setting up a redevelopment plan, as you are aware, any increased value in that property, that assessed value, goes into a separate redevelopment fund as a tax increment, property tax, goes into a redevelopment fund and can help those private property owners as well as the county in partnering with private property owners for improvements within that redevelopment boundary, such as streets, trails, sewer, water, if that's an issue. And we know that there are deficiencies in some of the area of state line. Some of that is older area. You have a lot of above ground utilities. You have a lot of water quality issues. There's not sufficient drainage, therefore meeting Tahoe Regional Planning Agency requirements. So it all kind of plays together, and it's a really good fit for the community in that area. And years ago, there was even discussion about a tax increment area versus a redevelopment area. But in this case, the board decided to proceed with a redevelopment plan. The plan is approved. There were no issues with that final adoption of the plan. There's a lot of potential there, and we know that there's a lot of property owners that want to invest in the area, and so it's really the county stepping up and helping with that as necessary, case-by-case basis, as projects may come forward in the future.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of that infrastructure is pretty tired in Lake Tahoe and does need, updating and replacing. And if it is going to continue to be a destination resort kind of area, then, it needs to be upgraded.
It definitely does, and the Tahoe Prosperity Plan, economic, vitality plans, all identify that area to improve recreation and tourism for the area versus just the gaming part of it. And so that's why you've seen over the course of the last couple of years the county investment through grants and other programs, to start the state line to state line bikeway and other improvements in that area.
Well, now they have a plan put together.
Yeah.
Will people come forward now with various projects?
Well, we know certainly that Edgewood is continuing with their project.
Sure.
So that's not online yet, so we will be able to capture that tax increment once that's completed. Tahoe Shores is another one for sure. No other projects identified at this time right now.
No.
But there is a list of potential projects in the plan, and so that'll have to be evaluated as those programs come forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also at that February 18th meeting, commissioners approved a recommended plan from the County Finance Department for the distribution of $1.3 million from the 2014-2015 general fund. That was the adjusted balance. That's quite a bit of money left over, isn't it?
Yes, yes it is. Yes, it is. And as you listened to the meeting and heard this discussion on that, there was a lot of discussion on the use of those funds. And it's a policy that the county has established where when you have those one-time funds available, and really the reason we have those funds is expenses have been kept down, lower than the projected expense amount, as well as revenues have exceeded the projected amount that we had. In this case, it was for fiscal year 14-15. And we're always behind about a year or so in distributing those funds because you have to go through the final fiscal year, you have to have the auditor look at that, and then you come up with your final numbers. So certainly there was a lot of discussion on where those monies should go to. Several commissioners were concerned about earmarking money for flood projects in the future. The difficulty there is the county hasn't identified any flood project per se. And certainly it's important to look at setting money aside and putting it in a fund for future use. But until you know exactly what you need, it's hard to say we're going to need this amount of money and this is a good piece of that chunk that we need to put in that fund. But a lot of the discussion was centered on the biggest chunk of the amounts was for public works, especially in putting money back into their operating emergency reserves. The money that they used for that was typically earmarked for road maintenance went into drainage maintenance and cleanup after the floods of 2014 and 2015 in that area. So it was rebuilding. $750,000 in total was to rebuild those reserves and those funds. Also, too, those amounts can be used for matching for a grant, a FEMA grant, in terms of getting some reimbursement on those costs. Also, too, for the building facilities itself, there's a deficiency in the maintenance of county buildings. Those type of assets, over the course of the recession, monies weren't sent to improving buildings such as heaters, air conditioning units, roofs, those kinds of standard maintenance that you need to plan for over time. So part of that was rebuilding some of that, putting money aside in that fund because the board had not earmarked money for that fund in the last number of years. So that was part of it. A lot of other smaller type issues are actually programs that the board allocated for community grants. Those are important to the board, as well as software improvements. regarding the auditor's report. That's something that needed to be done as well. A couple of vehicles, I know they had discussions, well, is this important to have a vehicle for a couple of people? And remembering it's one-time monies, and also money for the cleanup for a portion of the Carson River, and for concern with flooding and snagging and cleaning that area. So a lot of discussion regarding whether or not some of this money should be earmarked for employees themselves and bringing employees up to the minimum level based on our new comp class study. And the board recognized previously at their earlier February meeting that the directive to the finance department was, as you build this next year's budget, the directive is to bring employees up to the minimum if it's financially feasible. That still has to be fleshed out, and we still don't know those numbers. So hopefully we'll be able to get to that point rather than using these one-time funds, because for, in terms of sustainability, you have to be able to project out what those costs are year to year once you know what that amount is. And if you use one-time monies, that's not sustainable. You got to be able to cover it yourself every year, not just hoping for this one-time amount.
Yeah. They took a little different approach this time, didn't they, too? They had a recommendation list of,
yes.
of projects.
Yes.
A lot of times the commission would sit there for quite a lengthy period and wrangle over where the money is going to be spent. But this went a lot smoother with the list, and they approved the list as it was presented, too, didn't they?
They definitely did, and as the finance director had spoke about at that hearing is that it's difficult for staff to look at this, county manager and finance to look at, okay, these are areas, this is the amount, these are areas that need some funding for these purposes, and to try to prioritize that. And in some cases we had to say, you have a good project, but we're not going to recommend funding of this project at this time. And certainly it was easier this time because we did have a list, but the discussion with the board is that why do we do this? Why do we put ourselves through this every year? And it does come down to a policy decision by the board in terms of what they want to do in the future, and they can certainly come back and say we want to earmark any of these types of monies for a certain cause or a certain program, but they have to do that as part of a public process, and they have to have open discussion on that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it sounds like the money will be well spent.
Of course it will, yeah.
Okay, well, commissioners also approved funds to reinstate a construction inspector position for the engineering division of community development. So it sounds like kind of things are picking up, huh?
Things are definitely picking up. As I mentioned to the board at the meeting, the last couple of years I've come out of cycle and asked for a building inspector, and both it was in the beginning of the year, because what we saw is things had picked up, and you have to be ready for that, people building and more activity when the weather breaks, and it's really start of March, April is where things usually start picking up. So you have to be prepared for that. And so I use that example as, I certainly apologize for having to bring this forward at the time, but we know of all these projects moving ahead, current versus future projects. We have one inspector on board. This person is not able to inspect all the areas of Douglas County and stay on top of projects. And so it certainly is a need in the department. Plus also we asked to use the monies to fund this was from the prior fiscal year 14-15. And we see that over the years our department, both engineering and building, project out a certain amount of revenues. And we are very conservative on those numbers, and what we have found over the course of the last couple of years, we haven't projected enough revenues coming in. And so those revenues become available at the end of the fiscal year when all the audit is done. And so our request was to use those funds to help fund this position for this next year. And it's appropriate because the permitting funds that we receive are related to engineering, building and planning also, but engineering as well.
Okay, well that pretty well covers the two meetings in February of the Douglas County Board of Commissioners. Do you have a preview of any items coming up on the March Commission agendas?
Well, one of the bigger ticket items is the Corley, the Farmstead Master Plan Amendment and Specific Plan. This is an area located on Pine Nut Road, Highway 395 generally, and there's been a lot of public comment regarding it. It did go to the Planning Commission a few months back, and the Planning Commission was recommending denial of that request. The project will go to the board, and the recommendation is for denial as well. It's carrying that Planning Commission recommendation forward. It involves setting aside some conservation and like a garden area as part of a residential development and some commercial development. And so it's a little bit different in that they're looking at catering to 55 and older on the residential side. And we believe it's certainly a need in the community, and it's something that needs to move forward. We believe it meets all the findings of a master plan amendment. Therefore, we had recommended approval to the Planning Commission. So the board certainly will receive a lot of written comment, and already have received that, but I know that they'll receive a lot of public comment at the meeting. And there's concern, especially from the Ruinstrath community residents, on the impacts to their community as well as to the water itself. Ruinstrath has private wells. They're concerned about any drawdown of the aquifer. The Gardnerville Town Water Company is going to serve this project. Similarly, they're serving the Washoe Tribal Project, which is next door, adjacent, which will house lodging and other uses there, a casino and convenience store. So with that, there's concern about it, but that water is being utilized from a different aquifer, and so it will have no impact on the residents of Ruinstrath. It may provide water lines closer to them, but there in no way is there any requirement that they be connected to the water system at this time. It just provides for that in the future if needed.
Okay. Well, Mimi, I want to thank you very much for being
You're
here.
welcome.
And sharing
Glad to
all
be
this
here.
information about the county and the Board of Commissioners meeting. Interim County Manager Mimi Moss. We'll miss you as County Manager, but you will stay on as Community Development Director.
I will. You'll still see me. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mimi, thank you.
You're welcome.
And that'll wrap up our County Manager's Report. I'm Lloyd Higuera for Interim County Manager Mimi Moss for the County Manager's Report.